What was the government response? Well, the first thing to say is that the Highways Agency is already doing what we asked. And they should be congratulated. I would say that, wouldn't I, because I used to be Minister for Roads and Traffic and actually was responsible for setting up the Highways Agency in the first place back in 1993-4. And so they're doing a lot. They are indeed rethinking those statistics on accidents. Is it really true that if you have better lighting, you cut down the number of accidents? Well, up to a point, Lord Copper. But, you know, we've heard the statisticians' view of all that. Then, the next thing the government did do was make light pollution a statutory nuisance under the Clean Neighbourhood and Environment Act. And that's really important. Central government's done their bit. We'll see what happens to local government later. Then, we forced out of the Lord Sainsbury, the Science Minister, information about the extremely large telescope project, but of course it's not going to come here. Decision will be made sometime after 2008, but it won't be in Britain. But we will be paying 20% of the cost, and well, that's very good news. But then we got onto the very difficult question of aviation vapor trails. Now, this was a fascinating bit of our report, and in anticipation, in preparation for today, I actually wrote to Lord Sainsbury, the Science Minister, on the 12th of June, I do my homework, this year, asking about aircraft vapor trails and climate change and impact on astronomy. And I didn't hear, and I didn't hear, and I didn't hear. Over a month later, 6 weeks later, I phoned Lord Sainsbury's office and was told, well, they'd actually had a problem here because Lord Sainsbury didn't want to answer the letter. He'd handed it over to DEFRA, who deal with climate change. And DEFRA said, we don't want to answer this because no, it's science, isn't it? It's indicative of passing the buck in government with difficult questions. Well, I did actually have an answer to my letter of the 12th of June on the 15th of August. And it did come, indeed, from the Science Minister, from Lord Sainsbury, and it was a very, very long letter, and a huge amount of work had been done by officials, and I'm very grateful to them. And it told us quite a lot of what was going on here, not only that, but also the other work that was going on at the Institute for Aviation and the Environment at Cambridge, NERC, Centres for Atmospheric Science at Reading, EPSRC, Engineering Physics, Science Research Council, University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology, EU Life Programme. Hey, that's all very good stuff. And we're very pleased about that, of course. But if you look at some of the work going on elsewhere, you find, for example, that the Tyndall Centre are doing a great deal of work here. The Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research has produced an excellent paper on growth scenarios for EU and UK aviation, which is pretty scary stuff, because it says, as you can see here, that aviation growth could take up the entire emission space of the EU under emissions trading scheme. So that's not the answer, but some people think it's the answer. The Minister certainly thinks it's the answer. In fact, in a publication for parliamentarians called The Monitor, they did a supplement called Blue Skies, in which the Minister for Aviation, who had been in post for 2 weeks, said, without a thriving air industry, our international competitiveness would be seriously undermined. And we had various views. I didn't notice any views from you, Bob, and I didn't notice any views from CPRE, or Friends of the Earth, or anybody else, but who should be surprised? Because who paid for it? Boeing. Okay? So, in politics, you really do have to notice who's saying what and why. And then you have to come to your conclusions, of course, at the end of it. But then there was a letter in Nature as well, in the edition of Nature, and the date is, the 15th of June of this year. Very, very interesting. The importance of the diurnal and annual cycle of air traffic for contrail radiative forcing. We find that nighttime flights during winter, December to February, are responsible for most of the contrail radiative forcing. Night flights account for only 25% of daily air traffic, but contribute 60 to 80% of the contrail forcing. Further, winter flights account for only 22% of annual air traffic, but contribute half of the annual mean forcing. These results suggest that flight rescheduling could help to minimise the climate impact of aviation. Good old science. Thank goodness for that. So anyhow, we carry on. The government response was good, but then we had to turn, of course, to local government, because they are the guys who've got to make it work. And we were concerned that there should be planning authority awareness of the new legislation. Well, I checked with my own district council in Salisbury, and I was delighted to be put through to one of two local government officials who are charged with the light pollution task, and they have to assess planning applications. They have to assess whether proposals for developments, whether it's housing, industry, sport and leisure, are going to be provided with the right sort of lighting. That's very good news. I just wish I thought all local authorities were as good. And if you go to Salisbury and you see the park and ride sites, especially the one next to Old Sarum, and partly because it's of course not far from Boscombe Military Airfield, all the lighting is full cut-off. It's really very low impact, I'm glad to say. But they did tell me, these guys in the planning office, there's a problem about the about light meters. They're very expensive, over £500 each, and also they've got to be quite sure what they're measuring and will it stand up in court. Because most complaints about light pollution are your neighbour's security lights, as we heard earlier. Absolutely right. Tap on the shoulder of your neighbour and ask if you can tip their light down so that it's not actually shining straight in your eyes or into your bedroom. But in the end, you've got to make sure that light meters work. And then you've got to make sure, as I've said, that the planning people are sensitive to floodlighting of buildings. Well, how interesting. Now in Salisbury, we have quite a big building that's flooded every night. It's called Salisbury Cathedral. But it is switched off at 11 o'clock every night. Unlike the district council offices. Right. Now the next problem that my local authority guys told me was, there are court cases now building up about this, but is light pollution a nuisance, a statutory nuisance, or an annoyance? And a good lawyer will argue that it's an annoyance that doesn't come under the Act, so forget it. And this is something that we're looking at and Parliament will return to, because if the wording of the Act is deficient, it will need to be changed, because the will of Parliament was quite clear. Now, we've done a lot into this business. Good lighting makes roads and footpaths safer. Well, yes, it does, and up to a point it deters crime. True. We've had lots of evidence to the contrary. And I can tell you as a politician, as opposed to a statistician, that it makes roads and footpaths safer, sometimes not for obvious reasons. For example, in Salisbury, we now have a full CCTV coverage of the whole city centre and some of the villages nearby, like Amesbury and Wilton. And you can, in fact, if you're, for example, a single woman, you can phone up the council control room of the CCTV camera and say, I want to go from the Red Lion in Milford Street to my home in Old Street, Harnham. Please will you track me? And they can, and they do. And they can track an individual citizen from the pub home if they're frightened of being beaten up or molested or whatever. That's quite good. But I'm sceptical about the rest, like everybody else. We know that bad lighting can be unsafe because it can shine in your eyes. If you're driving along in the dark, you suddenly come to a glaringly brightly lit roundabout in the middle of the countryside, you're dazzled. Not very clever. And similarly, one of the biggest causes of thefts in churches is floodlighting. Because the thieves can break into the church and they don't have to put on so much as a torch. It's all lit up like daylight. So a lot of problems there. But that's not all, is it? Because then we have to get on to these thorny subjects of energy waste, of the lighting industry and the taxpayer.